My name is Muireann Ranta, and I'm an early childhood education and care practitioner and a PhD candidate with the Department of Humanities at the South East Technological University in Ireland. I have also recently been awarded with a Government of Ireland scholarship with the Irish Research Council.
This short presentation stems from a child rights-based participatory study with young children from the ages of 2 to 5 entitled Can We See Our Voices?, which explored their own perspectives of nature under Article 29(1)(e) of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child. The study took place at an early childhood setting in Ireland. Article 29(1)(e) is an education right that directs each state party that ratified or signed the convention to provide every child living in their country with an education that supports the development of the respect of the natural environment. Ireland, for example, signed up in 1992, meaning that the right has been around for just over 30 years. Researchers and experts in the area of education for sustainability have highlighted for over 15 years the transformative role that early education can play in the changes needed to combat the climate crisis. While it has also been recognised that this would require sensitive and responsive pedagogy and praxis, positioning the child as a rights holder and contributing social actor within their educational setting, and respecting their agency to define their own education and participatory rights is essential. With that on board, the three broad aims of this research study were to explore with young children their own perspectives and lived experiences of nature under Article 29(1)(e), to develop a child rights-based research methodology with young children to support their own participation of developing an education for sustainable development approach in early childhood, and to contribute to the development of a child rights-based education for sustainable development approach in early childhood. So who were my participants and how did they define their own education and participatory rights? As I mentioned earlier, the study took place at an early childhood setting in Ireland over a 9-month period and involved two groups of children, 20 in total. The first group was a Children's Research Advisory Group, or CRAG, and that consisted of 3 and 4-year-olds and one 5-year-old who supported the design of the methodology, were field assistants during data collection, and also took part in data analysis and research dissemination with the publication of their own book, the Children's Nature Book, and a second younger group made up of 2 and 3-year-olds whose perspectives I'm sharing with you today. Research activities designed with the CRAG included making bird feeders, going on an insect hunt, tree and seed planting, and later on designing a waste management system. During our bird feeding activity, consideration was first given to how the activity could support children's agency to make their own bird feeders. This may seem an obvious aim when creating any learning activity, but actually an awful lot of suggested activities required a lot of adult support. I came across one that used apples covered in peanut butter and rolled in birdseed, most suitable for my participants' smaller hands. On that day, I worked with 3 children, one 2-year-old and 2 3-year-olds. There was a general group agreement that peanut butter was yucky, but for the sake of feeding the birds, they were okay to work with it. There was just no way they were going to eat it. That said, all 3 were happy enough to eat the apples while using other apples for the birds. This in itself was a very relevant moment in terms of identifying an authentic moment to gently intersect with some sustainability concepts, in that there was an opportunity to discuss with the children how they too ate apples like the birds and how they too were also part of the natural world. I also learned from them that if you eat too many apples, you can get a black bum. Leading on from there, it had been my intention to hang the apples outside in the setting's garden, but the three participants wanted to bring them home to their own garden, and so, of course, in terms of property rights, that needed to be acknowledged and respected. Also, it was coming up to Christmas, and the youngest participant wanted to hang theirs on their Christmas tree. When I asked how would the birds be able to eat the seeds, they responded, "This isn't for the birds, it's for me." From that activity, we also looked at native Irish birds and how to identify them. When we looked at the blackbird, one participant said that they didn't want to call it a blackbird because they no longer liked the colour black, and rather they wanted to call it Lily Lily Lil. Similarly, when I told them about the robin, the participant wanted me to rather call it Robbie the Robs. During our insect hunt activity, the crag had advised me to make sure that I had enough magnifying glasses for every child, that nobody liked to share in this group, and also to make sure that there was plenty of colours to choose from. Originally, I had the idea that we would make the magnifying glasses from scrap materials that I would collect on campus from the design and engineering department, which would look really good on my green ethics. However, the reality was that was really rather an adult initiated activity, which would require a lot, if not all, adult support and completely take from the participants' opportunity to enjoy their own sense of agency. So I took the Crank's guidance and I bought 20 huge, colourful magnifying glasses for the participants to engage with as they chose. And indeed they did. Some used them as frying pans in the mud kitchen, some collected and sorted them on the basis of their colour, and some used them to hunt for insects. Again, in this activity, there was a number of authentic moments to intersect with respect for nature concepts in terms of not touching species or how to handle species and being gentle, etc. And with a lot of excitement to see the wiggly worms up close and the local culture's disdain for sharing, there was great opportunity to discuss how we needed to respect the natural world and make a change to our own existing behaviours. And sure, then we got on to the subject of slugs, who the majority did not want to touch, but rather again proceeded as to how we could pretend to be slugs and how we needed to move our whole bodies on the ground to do this properly. As it turned out, this was really rather an inclusive activity in that, let's say, the quieter child or the child who did not verbally engage rather engaged with their bodies and their emotions. And for me, I wanted to really pinpoint this to demonstrate all of the children's contributions to how they defined their participatory rights and that they did vary in so many different ways. We planted willow cuttings, which, as it transpired, the children, once I loosened the dirt, it was hard enough in December, were confident to continue by themselves with hand shovels and then work in pairs or with me to hold the little tree and fill the hole back in. A few of them told me that I needed to stomp around the tree with my foot to make sure it was in properly. So that activity I remember thinking was a real example of knowledge exchange between us. For example, I didn't know that once the tree was in, it needed a cup of tea to settle in, and that's how they got watered. Again, the participation of this varied in terms of some choosing to plant trees and others making the tea. And then my last example was an activity where we were simply outside and looking at horse chestnuts and pine cones. In this case, the children engaged with the materials more in a socio-drama type play, where some were squirrels and used their hats to collect them for their nests, and some took them to the playhouse to use as food. One aspect of this activity which I found interesting was that there was a request from a number of children to bring the pine cones home. Again, this provided an opportunity to talk about the effects of humans removing parts of nature for aesthetic desire rather than survival need, and an opportunity to change that behaviour and rather leave the pine cones and the horse chestnuts where they belong for our fellow species. This was a tricky conversation, and something that I did come up again in other activities where some children continually wanted to keep materials for themselves, and something that we might need to consider further. I appreciate that these extracts are perhaps a bit messy, maybe difficult to fully grasp out of context, but I decided to deliver them to you like this to give rather a sense of the actual research culture and indeed the complexity of the interwoven webs of dialogue that did readily occur. And to recognise this as to how the children enjoy their participatory rights itself is very relevant to the discourse of early childhood research. The following three slides are a more tidied up version of that and represent the findings as I have analysed them from working with the children. Firstly, in terms of the children's perspectives of nature education, we can identify that they readily made their own nature connections, such as sharing existing knowledge and stories, own forms of play with nature, own interests of nature, and own means of engaging with nature learning. Furthermore, these connections were individual and varied. They were not always verbal or immediately visible. Some were louder than others, and some were not understood by adults. For example, apples give you black bums. And so then, from my adult perspective, I could recognize that by eliciting the children's own nature connections and using them as the basis to build on learning, offered opportunity for more authentic, democratic, rights-based education. And indeed, we could also see examples of sensitive adult intersections of sustainability learning elements. And so then together, both the children's and adults' perspectives provide a consolidation of how holistic early childhood pedagogy is considered a potentially fertile soil for education for sustainable development. And to conclude, the evidence is there that children do define their own competencies and participation in their learning under Article 29(1)(e). The second theme that I was interested in was in terms of how the participants defined their participatory rights. Similar to how they defined their nature education rights, there was a number of examples of this. Firstly, how they negotiated their assent to take part in the research activities, which involved checking to see what materials I had brought, coming and going from the activity, taking the research tools and using them in their own way. That was not in my agenda. Bringing ideas into the topics being discussed in the research space and using those ideas to change the agenda. And again, similar to the nature connections, there was a variation in participation. It was individual. It was not always verbal or easily visible. It at times was interdependent and relational, from which I mean that it needed peer support or support from a familiar other to bring forward. And at times it was not always understood by adults. From this, I recognise two key themes, which were by eliciting and respecting own participation as the basis to build on learning, offered opportunity for more authentic, democratic, rights-based education, and that the research participation also offered further insight of the intertwinement of the education for sustainable development, social and cultural and political pillars. Again, it can be said that this provides a consolidation of how holistic early childhood pedagogy is considered a potentially fertile soil for education for sustainable development. Also, a consolidation for the importance of the practitioner's skill set in eliciting participation and the importance of time, space, and listening in eliciting participation in a shift to rights-based pedagogy. And therefore, the conclusion I came to was that through recognizing participation complexities and being sensitive to individual learning participation can better support rights respecting learning spaces. With those two findings, the final theme that was explored with the children was to analyse in further detail this pedagogical advantage and skill set of the early childhood education and care practitioner for the uptake of a rights-based approach to education for sustainable development. From the data collected, the children gave their input on how they enjoyed to learn. For example, they enjoyed hands-on experiences, sharing their own stories and ideas while learning, having their own time to explore the learning tools, sharing and enjoying in the exploration wonderment during learning, that there was plenty of choice, and that they did not want to share while they were learning. And from that, the common themes derived were again that learning, or how the child defined their education right, was again individual and varied, that many opportunities for intersexual moments of sustainability concepts could be identified, and that overall authentic learning evolved more effectively when the supporting adult understood how the children enjoyed to learn. From my perspective, I could again identify that similar to understanding children's own nature connections and definitions of participation, building on how they defined their education rights or individual learning choices offered opportunity for a rights-based approach. Furthermore, it was clear that by understanding and respecting the local culture of the educational context, in this case, a small early childhood setting with regular access to nature in South East Ireland, also supported a more authentic rights-based approach. So together, looking at both the children's and my perspectives provided a consolidation of how holistic early childhood pedagogy is considered a potentially fertile soil for education for sustainable development, alongside a consolidation for the relevance of the early childhood education and care practitioner's skill set in a rights-based approach for sustainability promotion, which I concluded highlights the essential role of the interdependent nature of the practitioner-child relationship in bringing forward authentic rights respecting learning spaces. The next steps of this project currently involve data collection with a group of early childhood education and care practitioners to explore their perspectives of the findings this far. From there, I am hoping that this will feed into recommendations of what resources in terms of training, access to nature, and staff ratios are required to support us in our duty-bearing role as educators for the realisation of our children's education and participatory rights under Article 29(1)(e) for the early childhood education and care sector. Thank you for listening.